the impact of that tax bill and the impact of Roy Moore's race in Alabama on the Republican Party, on Washington and beyond right now. But let's start there with Roy Moore. Joining me to discuss, Stephen Law. He's the head of the Senate Leadership Fund, a super PAC closely linked to the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Stephen, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Absolutely. Good to be on.
So you put millions against Roy Moore in the primary. You don't want him to be senator. That's clearly no secret. But what is the best option now in your mind?
Well, I mean, look, I think if Roy Moore can be banned from a local shopping center for harassing young girls, we ought to be able to keep him banned from the U.S. Senate. This is somebody who's got credible allegations against him, where as an adult he was harassing teen girls and exploiting them. These are things that really need to be treated seriously, and where political considerations need to take the back seat to doing what's right. And Senator McConnell very clearly engaged on looking for different options to resolve this issue, to make sure that Roy Moore doesn't end up in the U.S. Senate, and then hopefully, if we're able to save this U.S. Senate seat.
Well, that's the question, though. What is the best option, though? Because he's not off the ballot. He's definitely not stepping aside. What do you think is the best option? Do you think Jeff Sessions as a write-in is your best option?
Well, there are a few options, and that would be an especially good one. Write-in campaigns are very, very hard to do successfully. There probably is no other Alabamian beside the Attorney General who could do that and would have the gravitas and name ID and with Alabama voters to be able to pull that off. In addition to that, the governor could, she's moved this election date before, she could move it again, given all the chaos surrounding this election. Right now, she seems unlikely to want to do that because she's probably concerned about Roy Moore loyalist voters, and she's got her own primary next year. But there are options to pursue. It's also possible for him not to be seated, possible for him also to be expelled if he is seated. So there's an array of options. We just need to figure the right one.
Well, there is an array of options, but it seems no one's landed on which one's a good one, because they all seem to be tough ones right now. If you get even a Jeff Sessions, which is a big, huge if, to be a write-in candidate, are you concerned that you would then just split the Republican vote, leading for the Democrat in the race to win?
Well, I think for the Attorney General to even think about doing that, for the President to think that should be pursued, I think that we'd all have to be convinced that that is a workable strategy, that we could soak up enough of the vote to make sure that Doug Jones doesn't win. That's the last thing we want to do. We're just taking a look at it right now. We're taking a good hard look at what the polls show and whether this is an achievable option. But obviously, there are even bigger considerations than that at this moment. You
know, Stephen, expelling Roy Moore from the Senate if he wins, that, of course, is something that Mitch McConnell has talked about and is threatening. But this would be expelling a senator after he has won the vote, won the election, and he's been voted in. Is the Senate then thwarting the will of the people?
Well, as the New York Times said the other day, Senator McConnell has a well-documented history of showing little tolerance for sexual misconduct in the Senate, whether that was Larry Craig or Bob Packwood when Senator McConnell was the chairman of the Senate Ethics Committee.
Right, but that happened when they were senators, not when they were running. This is known to the voters, and if they still vote him in, are you thwarting the will of the voters?
Well, what's unique about the U.S. Senate is that it has its own rules. It has its own self-enforcing rules of conduct for senators. And it can enforce them itself. It can decide who it wants to seat or not. And it can also decide whom to expel or not. And I would say that when Senator McConnell made the determination that Bob Packwood needed to be expelled from the Senate, initially that was met with a lot of skepticism and a certain amount of resistance from his own caucus. There was concerns about losing the seat. But one thing you have to give Senator McConnell credit for is he takes these issues very seriously, he's methodical about it, and he usually wins.
Well, let's see. His record might be tested on that one this time. Stephen Law, great to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.